Oh, good morning. I told Glenn that I was going to start my reflection to you today with repeating the last short paragraph of the reading he just offered. But he knocked it out of the park, so we're not going to do that. The apartment that my wife and I share is just over the border in San Ramon, and we're near some open space. And several times over the last month or so, I have encountered one or two wild coyotes. And Anne was walking the dog this morning, and she said, "They told me there was a coyote on the path, so we went the other way." I chose this title, The Once and Future Church, because I remembered liking talking on that theme when I was newly arrived in my former congregation, and I thought it would be good to begin to reflect back to you some of the things I'm learning about you. I had forgotten that in notes after that last congregation 4 years ago, I wrote, "Don't do this a month in, wait at least 6. I know a little bit about you, and I'm going to reflect back that little. Depending on how time goes and I am inspired, we may want to pass the mic. I may ask some thoughts and reflections from you, so if the greeter could be ready and if we could get another microphone, that would be great. Apologies for not arranging this in advance. Just so we're all on the same page, sometimes I write complete scripts, sometimes I try to be inspired. This is in the latter category.
Please include us Zoomies.
Oh, okay. Doesn't mean it's less inspired. We are in a particular moment of time, aren't we? When I talk to other colleagues, it would be enough to use the phrase from the Jewish tradition if we were still coming out of a global pandemic. Congregations like ours were rocked. We had to learn new things. We had to pivot on a dime. In general, at least in this society, we seem to have lost some faith in what had been called the public good, the public sphere. We pulled inward. Phrases such as social isolating became necessary. That's a troubling phrase in any other context, but we needed it to keep one another safe. And I say that, maybe I don't need to explain this, but my father was in pharmaceuticals and my mother was a public health educator. So that stuff is in my bones. And there were some things I rebelled about my parents, but it was never about healthcare. And now, with the current administration in Washington and in many capitals across our nation, the country seems to be turning in on itself. We've prided ourselves as a democracy, and what we're seeing is 1930s Germany, frankly. More about that in the weeks to come. There are two passages from our tradition that have been reverberating with me. And then a quote from a Christian theologian. I'll share this, and you may have heard both of these. I don't presume that they're new. Joseph Cherry's, the Reverend Joseph M. Cherry's Prayer for Living Intention. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. And he concludes, may we as a person of faith be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. And from the poet Dina Metzger, there are those who are trying to set fire to the world. We are in danger. There is only time to work slowly. There is no time not to love. What I am learning about you starts with a couple of books, and it didn't dawn on me until Tanya was reading the story about Ordinary Mary. The title of the first book, History, is An Ordinary Miracle, and the second, The Miracle Continues. These are histories of this faith community written at the 35th and 50th anniversaries. We are now entering, if I have it right, our 71st or maybe 71st year. And so if we're going to have another of these books at the 75th anniversary, we might want to start thinking about it now. And perhaps even more importantly, what would we like to have been written? What I have begun to learn about you is that you know how to do church. And that, this is a congregation in name both Unitarian and Universalist. Again, this is, you will have heard these things, I expect. Do you know the old joke about the Unitarians and the Universalists? That the Universalists believe that God was too good to damn them, and the Unitarians believe they were too good to be damned? That sums up the cultural differences between Unitarians and Universalists. I come from the Unitarian tradition. Overeducated white folks who are a blessing to this earth when they don't let their egos get in their way. This, although it is Unitarian Universalist in name, is probably the most Universalist congregation I've ever served. And I spent an interim year at the First Universalist congregation in Rochester, upstate New York. And what I learned there, and this is a terrible generalization, the Universalists knew how to move in loving ways. They didn't necessarily know how to behave institutionally. And so when the two denominations, they were separate denominations that merged in 61, it was the Universalists who had the bank accounts. The Unitarians had the numbers, but they needed the money. Unitarians don't like admitting that fact. And as the Christian theologian of the previous century, Paul Tillich, once wrote, the first duty of love is to listen. I have seen, even in my short time with you, and tomorrow will mark my being with you formally 1 month. So I'm still really new. I have witnessed among you a willingness and a desire to listen to one another that is humbling and a bit of a teacher to me. And I consider myself a fairly good listener, but I tend to be moving. As I mentioned to Daryl earlier this morning. On Sunday mornings, I run around with my head cut off. And he just said, I'll stay out of your way. And I'm thinking of Daryl because a week ago on Friday evening, I was driving to one of the homes of a member of this larger community to provide a grocery run. And I just happened to, didn't know I was going to. I passed the Peace Corner, and there was Daryl and others of you out doing your work. That's really good to see as the new pastor. You guys walk your talk. Not something all Unitarians do. Yesterday, I mentioned this to Glenn, and I may, if I get permission, I may well include the short YouTube video in another service coming up. But there's a woman by the name on YouTube, Belle of the Ranch. She's from the South. She's a horse person, and she's a really good person who reflects on what's going on. And she was responding to a letter that came in from someone that said, you know, I've always been a fan of Star Trek, but I am beginning to despair that the utopian society that Star Trek is birthed from will ever come about. And Belle replied, in part, I have a benefit, she said, because I didn't watch Star Trek as a kid, so it's all new to me. I've started, but I don't know it all that well. But she went and looked up the history of Star Trek and how supposedly humanity got to that utopian vision. It may not surprise you that humanity had to deal with a nuclear World War III. And Glenn told me this morning there had been a eugenics war. When do you think that World War III, that hypothetical World War III, would have taken place in the Star Trek universe? This was written in the late 60s. 2026. It takes getting through a lot of hardship and loss to get where we want to be. And this congregation needs to be part of that. Unitarian Universalists have long, and this is a generalization, but I'll say it, I believe it. And if you'll forgive a sports metaphor, we punch above our weight all the time. And that's because we take our faith and our abilities seriously. That's because we trust the truth and we stand by it, and we do so vocally. I'll leave you with this short little series of reflections with perhaps the best synopsis of what our living faith is about. And this is from the end of Paul Razor's book, Faith Without Certainty, Liberal Theology for the 21st Century. He writes, liberal theology is not for the faint of heart. It points us in a general direction without telling us the specific destination. It refuses to make our commitments for us, but it holds us accountable for the commitments we do make. The liberal religious tradition is an invitation, not a mandate. It invites us to live with ambiguity without giving in to facile compromise, to engage in dialogue without trying to control the conversation, to be open to change without accepting change too casually, to make commitments seriously but not blindly, and to be engaged in the culture without succumbing to the culture's values. Liberal religion calls us to strength without rigidity, conviction without ideology, openness without laziness. It asks us to pay attention. It is an eyes wide open faith, a faith without certainty. Thank you. May the conversation continue.